The world remembers Gustavo Kuerten as the happiest man to ever play tennis, the man who drew a heart in the clay of Roland Garros, the man who smiled at 60,000 strangers like each one of them was the reason he played. That smile was the greatest illusion in sports history, because behind it, the man was disintegrating. He would spend years letting surgeons remove irreplaceable cartilage from his own hip, knowingly. And when it wasn't enough, he ended up in a cheap hotel room in Colorado, legs swollen to the size of an elephant's, begging a nurse for morphine just to survive the night. Why would the most joyful player on earth willingly let the sport consume him piece by piece? Because the trophies were never for him. Every single one of them was a payment, a desperate attempt to honor a father who died of a heart attack on a tennis court when Guga was 8 years old, and to bring something, anything, to a severely disabled brother whose single greatest victory in life was learning to hold a fork. This is not a story about winning Grand Slams. This is the story of a man who sacrificed his own body trying to save his family's soul. His name was Gustavo Kuerten, the father, the compass, the man who had given Gustavo the game in the first place. In May of 1985, at the Santa Monica Club in Curitiba, Aldo suffered a fatal heart attack while refereeing a junior match. He died on a tennis court. He was gone before his son could understand what loss meant. But here is what no one told Gustavo until years later. Before Aldo died, he made his eldest son, Rafael, promise one thing: don't let Gustavo quit tennis for football. It was a silent will, a contract signed without a witness, and Gustavo Kuerten would honor it for the rest of his competitive life, not because he knew about the promise, but because he felt it. The family Aldo left behind was marked in more ways than one. Gustavo's younger brother, Guilherme, had been born with severe physical and mental disabilities, complications at birth that no doctor could undo. While the world would later see Guga as the picture of physical perfection on a tennis court, the home he grew up in was built around a very different kind of victory. The day Guilherme managed to hold a fork was celebrated with the same ferocity as a Grand Slam title, not as metaphor, as truth. This is where Gustavo Kuerten was formed, not in the academies, not in Paris, in a house in Florianopolis where love was measured in small victories and grief was never fully spoken aloud. When he was 15, Guga traveled to Europe for the first time. He stood in front of the Louvre in Paris and sent a postcard home. On the back, the gangly teenager wrote, "I am a tennis player from Brazil. There are thousands like me, but I think I can be number one." He told no one. He tucked the conviction away like a secret weapon. The army classified him at 18 as physically unfit, B2, severe scoliosis, structurally compromised, a body the state considered broken. That body would one day be ranked number one in the world. Paris, June 1997. Gustavo Kuerten is ranked 66th in the world. He is 20 years old, virtually unknown outside Brazil, and he has never won a Masters-level tournament. He beats 3 former Roland Garros champions in succession. The defending champion, Sergi Bruguera, falls in the final. Guga doesn't just win. He dismantles, and then he does something no one expected. He sits in the clay, spreads his arms wide, and laughs like a man who's just been told a joke so good he can barely breathe. He described that tournament years later as a flash of light, something that was never supposed to happen. If he played it 1,000,000 times, he said, he wouldn't win it again. He was right. But Brazil didn't know that yet. Brazil needed a hero. Ayrton Senna had been gone for 3 years. The country was starving for someone to believe in, and Gustavo Kuerten, the kid from Florianopolis who rode an old motorcycle and surfed with childhood friends, filled that space without ever asking for it. The Guga mania that followed wasn't adulation. It was desperation dressed as celebration. By 1998, the weight of it had become suffocating. An entire country pointing at one man and saying, "Be everything for us." He felt relief when he lost. He held it together. He always held it together. Lisbon, December 2000. He defeats Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi within 48 hours at the Masters Cup. He ends the year as #1 in the world, the first South American ever to do so. His brother Guilherme received the trophy, as always. Then came New York, August 2001, a match against Max Mirny that became the finest single performance of Kuerten's career. More than 100 winners in nearly 4 hours. The greatest night of his playing life, and the last. That night in New York, something gave way inside the hip and never came back. The body had finally presented its invoice. Nashville, February 2002. The surgeon removes the labrum entirely, the cartilage that gives the hip joint its structural integrity, gone. A procedure that modern sports medicine now considers a fundamental error. What should have been preserved was extracted. Guga described himself afterward as a guinea pig. He was 25 years old. What followed was a cycle any man who has fought a losing medical battle will recognize. Hope, surgery, partial recovery, collapse, new specialist, new hope, collapse again. Pittsburgh 2004, Vail 2006. In Vail, Guga was in a small room, freezing cold, leg tied to a pulley, begging a nurse for morphine to get through the night. This is the man who had smiled for 60,000 people in Paris. And while his body was being taken apart, one operation at a time, a different war was being fought. Calgary, September 2003. The Brazilian Davis Cup team had just suffered a humiliating defeat. In what Guga described as the saddest locker room of his life, he and his teammates confronted the head of the Brazilian Tennis Confederation, Nelson Nastas, directly. They demanded he resign. Nastas refused. In March of 2004, Guga announced a boycott. He walked away from the Davis Cup, away from the competition he dreamed of winning for Brazil, because he wouldn't play under a man he believed was exploiting the athletes who had built Brazilian tennis with their bodies. Nastas called him a mercenary in the press. The same irrational loyalty that made him hand every trophy to Guilherme made him stand in front of a microphone and burn a dream. Some men are built that way. The ones who would rather lose everything for the right reason than win anything for the wrong one. Meanwhile, back in Florianopolis, Guilherme still waited for the trophies. The metal, the crystal, his eyes lit up when they caught the light. That was enough for Guga. It had always been enough. By 2006, Guga had exhausted every conventional option. He sought out a spiritual healer in Brazil. He spoke about it openly. "I always look for new places and new kinds of help. This spiritual side matters." This wasn't superstition. This was a man who had run out of surgeons. And slowly, quietly, the body made the decision his mind couldn't. He admitted years later that the hip had helped him stop, that it removed the doubt. There was no longer a question to answer, not with grief, with relief. November 2007, Florianopolis. Guilherme Kuerten died of cardiac arrest in the presence of his family. He was 28 years old. The guardian of the trophies was gone. Every title Guga had ever won, he'd won for two people. his father, who died on a tennis court, and his brother, who never understood what the trophies meant but made them feel like they mattered more than they were. Both were gone now. When a man loses the person he was doing it all for, the trophies don't disappear. They just become impossible to explain. 6 months later, Paris, May 25, 2008. Roland Garros. Court Philippe Chatrier. Guga walks out for the last time. The crowd that watched him draw a heart in this clay 7 years earlier stands in a silence heavier than nostalgia. He loses in 4 sets. Under the towel between games, he wept, alone with his thoughts and the memory of his father. Novak Djokovic stood in the stands and applauded. Guga walked off the court at 31 years old, not defeated, finished. It's not that I don't want to play anymore, it's that I simply cannot. In the months that followed, he enrolled as a freshman in performing arts in Florianopolis. He played bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream. He wanted to find an identity that wasn't the Guga from tennis. On a theater stage in southern Brazil, for a brief moment, he was just a man learning who he was without the game. The Instituto Gustavo Kuerten was founded in August 2000, at the height of his career. He didn't wait for the trophies to stop coming to build something that would last. 2 decades. Over 41 million reais invested, more than 108,000 people served. Today, Gustavo Kuerten is the global ambassador for wheelchair tennis. The man whose hip was destroyed by a surgical error now advocates for those who play sitting down, because he can no longer hold a racket standing up. He just calls it showing up. Novak Djokovic, the man who would redefine every record in the sport, has spoken repeatedly about Kuerten's humanity as an influence. Not his backhand, not his serve, his humanity. On a postcard from the Louvre at 15 years old, a boy from Florianopolis wrote a secret in careful handwriting. "I think I can be number 1. He made it there. 43 weeks at the top, 3 Roland Garros titles, a Masters Cup in Lisbon, where he beat Sampras and Agassi back-to-back. And then he handed every trophy to a boy with shining eyes who didn't know what they were worth. The postcard was never about the ranking. It was about proving, first to himself, then to the world, that a body classified as broken at 18, carrying a father who died too soon, and a brother who needed everything, in a country that had learned to doubt itself, could still find its way to the top of the world. Not to stay there, just to prove it was possible. Gustavo Kuerten didn't give Brazil a tennis champion. He gave a country permission to believe that the ones the world overlooks are often the ones carrying the most. The heart he drew in the clay of Roland Garros wasn't a celebration. It was a dedication.